Hello, all, and welcome back to another episode of Movies and Us, a weekly gathering place filled with conversations about movies, stories, and connection. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And today we are continuing our journey in Scorsese September. And today we're going to be reviewing Casino. Sarah, do you want to kick us off with an IMDb summary for Casino?
Sure. In Las Vegas, two best friends, a casino executive and a mafia enforcer, compete for a gambling empire and a fast-living, fast-loving socialite.
Fast living and fast loving.
Yeah, she got them both. Wow.
Double whammy right there. Okay, let's start off with our one sentence summaries of choice for Casino. What was yours?
Mine is, the longer you play, the more you lose.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And Ace is eating up all your monies.
Absolutely. Yep.
My one sentence summary is, the Goodfellas tribute band is here playing a show tonight on the Vegas Strip.
Yep, sure is.
Okay, let's start off with our initial thoughts of Casino. We will not include any spoilers in this first section, although this came out in 1995. So if you haven't seen it yet, we highly recommend checking it out. But in this first section, we will not include any spoilers first. Okay, Sarah, what were your thoughts about Casino?
Yeah, I was not prepared for this to be a 3-hour long movie.
Yeah, it is.
It is a 3-hour long movie.
Did
and
it
I
feel like a
wasn't.
3-hour long movie to you?
Yes.
Mm.
Yeah. So I was ready for this movie to be over. However, this movie does a lot of things really, really well. And so post viewing experience, I really do appreciate what this does. I think that it is structured very well. I think the characters are very interesting. The performances are great. Like it's a very well done movie. It was just too long for me. Uh but yeah, I've enjoyed thinking about it since I watched it, which is always a nice thing to experience.
Yeah, and I'm intrigued where your thoughts have wandered to with this, especially that post viewing experience, and as your feelings about this movie might have evolved and changed as well. I At my one sentence summary is a little bit facetious. I loved Casino. I think it has all of the things that I typically love in a film, and especially it is such a Scorsese film. It has all of the thematic components that he's been fascinated by. A lot of the filmmaking techniques that he uses throughout this film we've seen and he continues to use and are kind of distinguishing traits about his style. So overall, this is like solid Scorsese. I think as I've thought about this film more and while watching the film, actually, there's just so many similarities to Goodfellas, and I think that Goodfellas is a better film. I think I also felt the length of this as well, and I think a lot of that has to do with the pacing and the escalating tension of the third act that I think Goodfellas nails a lot more than Casino does. There's kind of a exponential rise in drama and kinetic energy. I think in the third act of Goodfellas that I wish there was in Casino, and I was kind of waiting for as well. But the characters are so dynamic and so fascinating and just a good time to hang out with. That if I have another extra hour with De Niro and Pesci and some others that we'll talk about, like, I love it. I'm here for it. This whole world is so alluring and captivating, and also incredibly overwhelming and stimulating in the best ways as well. So overall, I think this is solid Scorsese, but it made me want to watch Goodfellas again, because I think Goodfellas is a more effective film that uses a lot of the same components and ideas. So those are kind of my initial thoughts about Casino.
No, when I was watching, it was like, oh my gosh, Jen is loving this.
Oh,
This is
yes.
your bread and butter is
This
mobster.
is. It really is. So, yeah, it's everything that I love.
Yeah.
You're so right. So right. Okay, well, let's include the spoiler alert here. If you haven't seen Casino, we recommend checking it out. if you love Scorsese, if you love crime films, and if you love gangster movies, if you love some good, really solid, stimulating action and some gritty violence, this is checking all those boxes for you. It's a really good time, and this movie's actually really funny too, which I was pleasantly surprised at. So overall, good time. All right, where should we go first? I'm curious to hear actually how your thoughts maybe have evolved and shifted as you've had more time to reflect about this movie afterwards compared to your experience watching it, because that's always kind of a fascinating um, thought pattern to follow.
Yeah, no, I needed a nap after this movie. I was so tired. I was like, I cannot keep up with you mobsters and all of these shenanigans in Las Vegas. I need a nap and I am tired. Um, but I think I'm just really fascinated by these characters.
Mm,
Uh, I've been really thinking about how they're all such good foils for one another. Like Sam is the opposite of both Nikki and Ginger, and still those are his two closest relationships in some ways. And so just thinking more about who Sam is and why he's chosen these two to be kind of in his inner circle, even though him and Nikki, their relationship becomes antagonistic. And I think that that was just such an interesting choice to create so much tension between these three. And these characters, they don't change much during the course of the film, but who we know them to be at the beginning is who they are at the end, but we just see different facets of how who they are ekes out based on their circumstances that they find themselves in. And I think that that's really interesting, just these characters and their dynamics and how they play off of each other, and how they create stress for one another and bring out the worst in one another. I think just makes for a really stressful and chaotic, but also a really interesting movie.
I think that's a fabulous point because in a lot of films, we see the change and the evolution of our character, right? Like they are a product of their circumstances, and something, some catalyst causes them to fundamentally change in some way. And in Casino, we see all three of these characters become more of themselves, more extreme versions of themselves. It's almost like they are dials, and the volume of their personalities are turned up. And we see the costs of that. And that ultimately is all of their downfalls. But you're right, at the beginning of the film, the differences between Nikki and Sam actually complement each other really well. The things that Nikki can do for Sam is what Sam needs when it's toned down and when it's restrained, and there is kind of wisdom and principles behind it. But it's when Nikki kind of uh, goes his own path and blurs the lines of his boundaries, that then it begins to bring them into dangerous territory, and vice versa for Sam as well. The things that he is so incredibly talented and good at, and his strengths slowly become his weakness, like we've talked about on other conversations. So they are kind of at the beginning of the film this really perfect balance for each other, and great partners for their strengths and what they need to do to help each other both be successful. And that slowly devolves into them becoming even more extreme versions of themselves, which then introduces that tension that we see. Yeah.
It's always interesting when a character's strength then becomes their greatest weakness. I think that's such a human thing for us to experience, usually in like lower stakes situations. Uh, but that's such a human thing that I'm sure that we've all experienced in our lives, and we just see it in a more colorful and in a bigger scale in this movie.
Hmm. And what's really fun about the banter and the conversations that the two have as the film progresses is that they really can see each other pretty clearly too. And they're calling each other out on each other's BS, right? And clearly pinpointing the thing that we as the viewer see about each of their characters, but their characters are unable to come to terms with that. They aren't willing to accept that. They don't want to see themselves clearly. They completely reject that idea that they have gone too far. but they actually, as individuals, can see the other quite clearly the way that we as the viewers can. And it makes for some really great dialogue, especially as their animosity toward each other also continues to escalate.
We also just need those friends, who know
Yes.
us really well and can just point out those blind spots, even when it
Mhm.
hurts,
Yes.
so that we can all grow and become better human beings.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
helpful to actually listen to that person instead of ignoring them and becoming the worst
Mhm.
version of ourselves.
Yep. Yeah. But that's kind of the to your point, the point of the movie, which is that they're so their heads are so buried in the sand that they have no capacity to hear or receive anything that anyone's telling them. Um, they really are. I mean, this movie is basically the rise and fall of these men that are greedy and desire power and significance and worthiness, and ultimately went a little too far. What much farther.
Yeah,
Not
a
even a
lot
little.
too far.
Yes.
They went they went very too far. Like they crossed the line, I don't know, 300 miles ago,
Mhm.
and they're still
Yep.
going.
Yep. It was also interesting to me to think about this movie and think about The Irishman, which is also captivated by a lot of those same ideas around the rise of these figures that then have basically built their tower too tall and ultimately fall. Goodfellas is also about that as well, but there's a deeper level of reflectiveness that The Irishman has in that final scene of the older men that have truly nothing left, right? And, all the old mob bosses or whatever it was that are also reflecting on their lives. And it's just neat to compare Casino, which is still kind of in the midsection of Scorsese's career, to another film that he created in the later part of his career as he's aged and whatnot, that are still revolving around a lot of these same themes, but just from very different angles. So that was kind of neat to think about as well.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting to watch Goodfellas, Casino, and The Irishman, and have those films all in conversation with one another.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yep.
you can see not only has Scorsese evolved as a director, but he's also aged, as have his main characters in these films, and so they're exploring different themes from different angles, and I really appreciate, when a director's been doing their thing for a long time, you can see these threads and these themes through their work, and how their thinking has evolved over time. It's fascinating.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think when we think about Casino in comparison to Goodfellas, and specifically the Ace versus Henry Hill dynamic, there's I think a greater level of like aggression and ambition that we see in Henry Hill that is, I think, a little bit more raw than the one that we see in Ace, who is still intoxicated with a lot of the same things around like proving your worth and proving your significance, but it's done in a slightly different way. And I think Henry Hill's character in and of himself is younger in general than Ace is, the characters in the films themselves. So even that comparison to and the alignment of those two films with Goodfellas focusing on this like young boy and uh, his descent into the world of the mob and everything that unfolds there versus Ace, who's a little bit older, and I think the way that he approaches building his career is a little bit different as well. Um, I think that comparison is also like pretty well aligned as well with the timing of where these films fall in Scorsese's overall career.
And I also appreciate that Casino takes a little bit of a different look at the mob. The themes are very similar, but I love that this happens in Vegas. And so it's like this new playground that they're all playing in, and yeah, there are some already established rules, but you can also do a lot there, and you're not being controlled by the bosses like you would if you were back east. And so I think that allows this film to play in a way that you don't get to see as much in maybe some of these other movies just because the setting is so different, and you see uh, the the hubris and the desire for more that both Sam and Nikki have. You see that play out a little bit differently than you would if they were so like geographically close to their
Mm.
bosses. And so I think
Mhm.
that's a really interesting strategic choice that this film makes.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's kind of backed up by a lot of the voiceover and content that they're sharing in the voiceovers around like Las Vegas was this new pasture, this new area, this new place where we could tend to the land and figure out what we wanted to do, and it was this open field of possibilities that we could create. And I think what was interesting, one of the themes that I found really fascinating in this film was the foils, like you mentioned earlier, of Nikki versus Ace, and the approach that they have. I think really highlights the the fact that Nikki takes a gangster mob approach to control. Whereas Ace, he says several times that he wants to build this career and to build his empire through legitimate means. And this question, this tension that's often at play here is around legitimacy. It's very much in line, actually, with a theme in The Godfather around Don Corleone desiring legitimacy for Michael and to pass down businesses that were no longer in the underworld to his son. And so their approaches and their way of doing things are so vastly different. And it sows the seeds at the beginning of the film of some of that tension and their both of their approach and how they want to do things. But I think it really comes to fruition a lot later when we see Nikki's just let's grab at anything that we can approach, and that being such a contrast in their outcomes as well. So we see that Ace ultimately still has a place and still has a usefulness to the mob because he's approached things in a very different way. He hasn't, kind of shaken up the world as much and created so many enemies for himself.
Yeah, yeah. And you see how they disagree with each other's methods, but as long as they're not hurting one another, they kind of let each other be. But once their methods start hurting the other, that's when you see this huge tension and friction between them. And you see that problem really escalate. And I think that that's just, it's so interesting because it's all rooted in their personalities. It's not necessarily, I mean, obviously they do things that hurt the other, but their actions are so in line with who they are. And so their feud is really centered in their personalities and in their methodologies because they are so divergent, and their goals are the opposite of one another. And so that was always going to lead to tension, and we get to see how explosive that relationship becomes.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, which is that these two are very much um, co protagonists in this film on like an equal amount of investment that the film takes in both of them, which I think is a contrast to a film like Goodfellas, which is a lot more centered around Henry Hill's character. And Tommy, played by Joe Pesci, is kind of very prominent as well, but a little bit more of a supporting role. In this one, the dynamic, like you mentioned, between the two of them is the center of the show. And they both equally have a lot of the same screen time, a lot of the same emphasis when it comes to building their characters and building their story arcs as well. So I think that's one probably significant contrast is that like you mentioned, that interplay between their approaches being kind of what the movie's most captivated by versus just focusing on one of the two men and the other is the supporting character.
Yeah. And I would almost put Ginger up there too. Like I kind of feel
Yeah.
like we have three main characters in this film,
Mm.
which
Mhm.
is weird and something that you probably shouldn't do. Uh but it works in this, which is kind of wild.
Yeah, it's a really good point because she, in some way, brings out more of, well, I think all three of them bring out each other's character moments. And so
Yes.
it almost works well because they are bumping up against each other and therefore revealing more about themselves, right? Versus like them truly just serving a role as a supporting character to bring out that one primary character's um, character moments. It's actually this. I'm envisioning like these balls that are just like bumping up against each other inside this contained environment. They just can't help but collide with each other. And it creates these moments where we actually learn about not just our main protagonist, but both of them and at the same time. It's highly efficient, actually, but
Yeah.
it's hard to do. It's very hard to do.
Yes. And it's all throughout the movie. So like one of
Yeah.
my favorite character moments is when we first meet Ginger. Uh because we get to obviously like we're meeting her for the first time as she is like chucking this dude's chips all up in the air and just causing havoc in the middle of the casino. And so we learn how like wild and like free she is in one sense, but also how she has this really strong sense of justice. And if she feels that she has been wronged, she has no problem letting you know and making a scene and trying to make it her version of right. But I also think that because that's the moment when Sam is like, and I fell in love with her when she was doing that, like, you get such an insight into his mind too. Like, I read that as him almost seeing this wild creature that he wanted to tame. He wanted to understand her
Hmm.
because she is so free and he is so controlled. He wanted to be able to control that. And probably also wanted a little of that freedom that she was experiencing because he has to be so buttoned down. So I loved that moment because you can learn so much about these two characters all in that one little tiny scene. Like you said, it's so efficient, which is kind of wild to say about a 3 hour long movie, but it is very efficient in its character moments because you learn so much about all three of them all throughout the movie.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And she too becomes the more saturated version of herself by the end of the movie as
Oh,
well.
yeah.
Like the uh go-getter, takes initiative, fearless part of her never dies. It actually is heightened as, you know, a lot of times in Scorsese's films, the female characters like can be hard to watch. A lot of those scenes, it was hard to watch in this movie as well. But Ginger has agency. Like every decision that she makes significantly affects the plot of the film, and she goes after what she wants. So, as difficult as the scenes are to watch, I was like, also, this was made in 1995, like, good job. At least we have a female character that is not just there as extra color or to support the storyline of our two main male protagonists. Like, she just as much plays a significant role in significantly um, charting the path of these other two men as well. So, hats off to that.
No, she's great in this. And Sharon Stone gives a
Oh my gosh.
fantastic performance as
Yeah.
Ginger. Like it's it's so heartbreaking, but she is phenomenal in this role. And yeah, like you said, like she holds her own with two really great actors, with two really like fleshed out characters. And I think Ginger's right up there with them. She's not just a sidekick, she's not just a love interest, but there's enough here and her arc is meaty enough that I think she's a main character as well. Ugh,
Yeah,
love
and I
it.
think what's fascinating about Sharon Stone's performance is that she brings so much charisma to Ginger that I think like this character could easily have been played with so much over the top melodrama, and it's kind of thin and one toned in that way, but Sharon Stone brings such a like dynamism to Ginger as a character that like I too am captivated by her. So like I empathize with Ace. Like yes, I you want to be around this like dynamite energy as well, right? And I think that helps the Ginger character a lot because without that, I think a lot of those scenes that she's given, especially towards the second half of the film, could have easily leaned a little bit too much into one tone melodrama where it's big, it's over the top, and like that's what we're getting, and it's meant to um heighten the drama of the moment. But there's so much connection that we have to Ginger and kind of the way she goes after the things that she desires and holds her own and doesn't compromise or is willing to stand up to these two men. I think that in and of itself is pretty fascinating.
Yeah, and the movie does a good job setting up all three of these characters. Like early on, we see them operating in their strengths, and we see, the good parts of them. So there are elements that we want to root for, and we're invested in all three of them to some degree. And so I think because we have that emotional foundation, then when things get really unhinged, we still see these glimmers of good in them. So we want to keep rooting for them even as they're self-destructing and ruining each other's lives and ruining their own lives. We still see that kernel of goodness in them that makes us still want good things for them even when they're making bad choices. So even though this movie felt like 3 hours to me, I do appreciate how intentional it is to set up each of these characters in that way, so that we want to go on the journey with them.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, which is I have jot down a note here like 3 hours length, but also the characters are just so compelling. you just you want to see, you want to spend time with them, you want to see what happens to them, and I think that that's difficult to do. They also were able to accomplish that so efficiently at the beginning. I think a lot of that is, at least for me, what worked well is the voiceover. Um, Typically, you and I, we both hate that in movies. Like, come on, pick a better way to communicate what your characters are thinking and feeling. But in this case, it actually works really well. I think partially because those lines are written they're just so punchy and they're so indicative and representative both of those characters as well. And it's littered throughout the film that the voiceovers really work for me. I'm curious if they did for you as well.
No, I agree. Voiceovers don't typically work for me, but I think like you said, the writing is so witty and fast paced that it made it interesting, and it brings this additional color to what you're seeing on screen. And I think in certain moments you can also see the difference between the character narrating and the character in the scene. And I found that really interesting anytime that there was a little bit of maybe daylight between them. uh, I thought that that was just a fascinating way to communicate some of these things and keep us interested in the story and where it's going too. Like, oh, okay, maybe there's more happening here than meets the eye. So let's keep watching and see if we can get extra context. Yeah, I think the voiceovers worked. Good job, Scorsese.
Yeah, and I think part of why they also worked is they are spoken as if these two men are reflecting back on that time, and there's a contrast between that like reflective lens versus them living it in the moment. So you're right, like the way that um the voiceovers and the thoughts from the voiceovers are positioned are different from how they are presenting in the actual moment. And that contrast is like cognitively very fun to experience, right? Like you hear Nicky reflecting back on some of the choices and the things that he made and the way that he's packaging it up, like all of that I think is real, makes for a lot of fun, but also interesting character moments as well. Like this is you thinking back to that time period and how you would frame it.
Also, Nikki is just so fun.
He's the
Like,
best.
which is funny considering how violent he is. But he does it with a smile, and he does it with such joy. Uh it's just fun to watch him beat the crap out of people for 3 hours and make terrible decisions about his life. But yeah, Joe Pesci gives a phenomenal
Oh my
performance. He's
gosh.
so
Yes.
good in these types of roles.
Yeah.
Like, how do you become this good at playing a terrifying enforcer for the mob? Like,
Yeah.
what? It's a very specific set of skills. and Joe Pesci is fantastic at it, and I'm a
He's
little scared
so
about that.
he's so good at this role. I was reading some commentary online around people saying, "Wow, this is like an extension of basically his role that he played as Tommy in Goodfellas." And I'm like, "I don't care. Well, I want more of it. Let's have the third movie in this." Well, we kind of get it a little bit with Russ, but he's like the older, toned down version in The Irishman. But we want more of this, man. That the energy he brings, that raw, like uh aggression that he brings into a scene, but also the charisma that he brings alongside of that, like that pairing together is gold. It's so good. And the comedy that comes that's like also baked in there as well, sprinkled on top. It's so good.
Yeah, it's like in the beginning when he murders the dude with the pen.
Yes.
Like, that is hilarious
Yeah.
and brutal all
Yep.
in one. And so it's all throughout this movie, I was like, I don't know if I should be laughing or horrified because I'm both. And
Wait,
that's
can I talk about my favorite Nicky moment though?
yes.
Is when he is stealing and robbing this home of jewelry, and in his voiceover, he's like, "I don't like to see the owner's faces staring at me, so I always turn the photographs down."
Oh, it's so good.
Oh, it's so good. I love it. It makes sense, you know? You don't need to see the people that you're robbing. Just take it and
Hey,
run.
I get it. I get it.
Yeah.
Also, there were so many times when they were showing their crimes that I was like, we're like leaving fingerprints and DNA and things all about. Do we do we not I mean, the show CSI wasn't a thing back then, so we weren't thinking about these things, but surely there is police in Las Vegas, but maybe they take
Yes.
them off. But I was a little concerned, especially with all of
Yeah.
the law enforcement trying to follow Nikki. Like, man, if y'all had
Yeah.
dusted for fingerprints, he probably would have got him.
Yeah, yeah. I think that yeah, they know. They just you need to make sure to don't leave your pens around
That's true.
because he will come for you and
Yes.
threaten you
Yeah, if
and
you have
keep
a
you
really
quiet.
nice pen and you're a jerk about it,
Mhm.
he's
Yeah.
gonna get you.
Yeah. No Muji pens around. Keep the like cheap ones around. It's okay. They might be casualties. They might be like drenched in blood at some point. So
Ooh.
protect the Muji pens.
Or if
Or
you're
the G7 Pilot G7 ones, those are smooth. It's my favorite.
or if you have a really fancy pen, just don't be a jerk about it.
Mm, yeah,
That I mean, it's that simple. Just
yeah,
don't be a jerk if you got a fancy pen. Be a nice person.
yeah. It's so good. Well, that's one of the things that I found just like I think was like such an interesting pairing in a lot of the scenes that were incredibly violent. It's very Scorsese to do, but those super violent graphic scenes are paired with this like pop and rock soundtrack as well. And so it really takes away the edge and the like sobering reality of what you're watching while also maintaining the intensity of the scene. And I think that is such a Scorsese move, and he employs it so often in this film. So I thought that was, it was fun to see like his signature style coming through and working incredibly effectively in this movie.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like the score was very effective in this film. And I loved the way that it really transported us through time. Like I loved hearing the music change as we entered, as we left the 70s and got into the 80s, and it just really helped me understand where we were at in time based on what I was hearing. So I really appreciated how strategic the use of music was all throughout the film. It was great. So effective.
Yeah, and the score itself, I think scene to scene serves as foils to each other as well. Like when we are in the world that we need to be presentable and buttoned up in the world of the casino, it's often a much smoother sounding soundtrack, you know, a lot of the, like, crooning of, those, like, jazz singers and things like that, and then when we are going to whack someone with the mob, you have that, like, gritty rock soundtrack, and that pairing too, and the kind of whiplash that we get from that, I thought was also really, really fun. Very effective.
Yeah, man, you gotta get amped up when you're about to whack somebody. You can't have some smooth jazz going on when you're about to
No.
stab somebody to death with a pen.
Nothing elegant about that. Nope.
Nah, man. Gotta set
Nope.
the mood, you know? Set the mood for murder.
Oh, man. Yeah. Another Scorsese signature thing that I thought was so good in this as well was how active the camera is in every scene. And I think it works particularly well, harkening back to something that you mentioned earlier around this being the world of Vegas, and especially the way that we like descend and meander through with the camera through the world of the casino, and just the smoothness, but also like the activeness of the camera, just like zooming in and out of these scenes. I felt intoxicated by this world as well. And I think it really created a sense of like we are in another place. We are being introduced and lured into this world with our characters. And I thought that was very, very effective. The camera is like constantly moving in this film.
Yeah, and it shows the like frenetic nature of Vegas too, and the city that never sleeps, and you're always doing something, you're always, hustling to
Hmm.
try and win more. It feeds into that ambition and that desire for more, but I also think that it really accurately reflects the character's state of mind as well, because they are also grabbing for more. They are also have this like frenetic energy as they're trying to get whatever they're trying to get. So I think the camera is really, really effective at helping us get into their minds and getting into the mindset of this place as well. Just because it's always going.
Mhm,
Part of the
and
reason
it
why I was
also
so
contributes to that
stressed.
that feeling of being overstimulated too. Like,
Yes.
there's so much to look at, there's so much to see, your head is
Yeah.
constantly moving back and forth between what's over there and what's over here, and so, like, by the end of this 3 hours, we should feel exhausted, you know? Like, this is an exhausting world, we've done so much with these people, and the pace of their lives too is exhausting.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
it's a
Yeah.
way, like, highly effective at getting us to empathize. Yeah.
Yeah, there are some
Need a
scenes where
nap.
you see Ace with like a bottle of like nausea medication. I don't remember which brand it is now, but there were so many times where I was like, "Oh my gosh, yes. That is so relatable." Like if I were you, I would be drinking that constantly too because I would be so stressed because
Yeah.
how do you live like this? So I loved that we're in his world for a little bit and I'm like, "Oh my god, I need that bottle too." It's only been 2 hours, but I'm stressed too.
Yes.
Great.
Yes. And there's so many scenes too where we see how much he feels like he really can't rest. He can't keep his eyes off of the floor. He has to be the one to make sure and keep an eye on they're ensuring that there's no one coming to rip him off or to take from them or to work the system, you know, like he has put that burden on himself. And that's part of his character as well. So
Mhm.
it all ties back like these scenes and these little details all support and serve this character driven story, which is the best pairing. The action and the character coming together.
Well,
So
and
good.
I love that detail about Sam because he's not just a workaholic. Like, yes, he is a workaholic. He has control freak issues. Yes.
Hello, the blueberries. One
Hello.
of my other favorite scenes.
Honestly, though, like, have you had a crappy blueberry muffin? Like, I'm yes, the blueberries need to be distributed evenly. Thank you very much. But I love that we know that it's not just workaholism, but it's this idea that he needs to do his part, otherwise he's gonna die. Like the stakes are that
Hmm.
simple because he is sending money back to the mob. And if he doesn't send enough, they're going to send somebody to whack him. And so I love that there were already high stakes because it's a casino, so there's already stakes and there's already tension. But this film ratchets it up another level because it's the mob. And I love how you can feel that cloud just
Mm.
hanging over him for the entire film. It's great.
Oh, that's a really good point. Yeah, and it also makes for again fuels the tension between him and Nikki as well because there's that scene where
Mhm.
Nikki's like, "You're only here because I was here to protect you," and Ace is like, "No, you're only here because I've been making money for you to send back," and like them both feeling the ownership of their successes and not acknowledging the role that each other's played because they're just so in over their heads. Yeah, no, it's so good.
And I think that also plays into his whole thing with Ginger of like, can I trust you? And that $2 million. I feel like they're all so related, and you can feel that the mob really is a cloud hanging over his head, and he's just trying to figure out, how do I place these pieces strategically so that if something goes wrong, I can still be okay. Like, he's going to try and do everything he can so that nothing goes wrong, but he also has his backup plans. But can he trust the people who are integral to his backup plans not to screw him over? And so again, it just creates more tension and more stakes, and they're all wrapped up together in a just very stressful smoothie of a movie.
A very stressful smoothie, y'all.
Yeah.
Oh man, yes. Well, what's also I think fun about the backdrop of this is that they, specifically Ace and Ginger, are clearly so trained at not operating that way in the rest of their lives where they have all their bases covered. And so for them to figure out how to not translate over to their personal relationship is like impossible for both of them, right? Like they both are doing this dance of how much can I risk in this relationship with you? And both of them are trained to calculate the risk and protect against that. In For Ace, it's his gambling and his success and talent on that. For Ginger, it's her as a hustler and her having to make her way and provide for herself up until this point. So like both of them have their guards up. They are not wired to operate this way in a healthy relationship, which inevitably requires trust and risk and putting yourself out there and being vulnerable. Like they don't know how to do that because they both are not wired that way and haven't been trained by the world and the worlds that they've inhabited up until this point for any kind of healthy relationship with each other.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, with this type of movie, you know it's going to
We
go
knew.
bad.
Yep.
But especially when he proposed to her and she was like, "No, I don't. I don't want this. I don't want you. I don't love you. That's not it. I'm not here for this." Like, that's a good communication of feelings, and is a good sign to maybe, let's not push this and let's not continue to propose. But nope, he didn't take no for an answer, and
Yep.
things went downhill from there.
Yeah.
He should
Yeah.
have just, and again, like, it ties into his character and the whole gambling thing. He didn't know when to walk away because he's so
Mm-hmm.
used to always winning. And so he didn't know
Mm-hmm.
how to not win in this relationship. And so he just kept pressing. And
Yep.
then everything kind of falls apart.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Well, it also like is so indicative of his desire to control her
Oh,
and that
absolutely.
feeding his ego and this power dynamic that
Yeah.
he has and this control tendencies that he has. But also he again sees her very clearly too. And
Yes.
he understands how she's wired. So all these characters basically can see everyone else clearly but themselves, which isn't that so like us as human beings?
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Ooh. Yeah, this movie is a big ol' opportunity for self-reflection. Like,
Yep.
let's not be like these characters.
Yeah, they all just don't know when to walk away, basically. They don't know where the line is, they don't know when it is enough. They all have taken their strengths and just overextended them and gorged on them,
Mhm. Yep.
which makes for a stressful smoothie that we are gladly drinking up because it's a good old time.
Yeah. It just works, man. When characters just self-destruct, I don't know, it's a formula that works really well because it's fascinating to watch.
Yeah, yeah, that's so true. Okay, other things that we wanted to talk about, mention,
This
casino.
is adapted from a true story. So
Yes, it's based on a book written by the same person, Nicholas Pileggi, who also wrote Wise Guy, which is what Goodfellas was based off of. And
huh.
Scorsese and Pileggi co-wrote the screenplay
Mhm.
for this.
Yeah.
Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah. That's wild. Like
Yeah.
I I shouldn't be surprised because there's so many movies and TV shows about the mob. But every time I watch one of them, I'm like, "Wait, hold on a second. Like this is for real? People live this way?"
I know, right?
It's wild to me. I just this is an anthropological experience, I feel like, because this is a world that I know nothing about. I will never inhabit in any way. So I'm just like, "Whoa. How do you do this?" Wild. Fascinated.
And my anthropological study of myself was, why am I so upset seeing all of these mob bosses getting busted? I am upset. I would like justice for them. They don't deserve any of this, but I'm this is
Jen.
great character writing, which is that I'm rooting for the ones that are really a menace to society.
Yeah, Jen, they killed so many people,
They did. They did.
but
But
they
they
did do it
have
with
their
style.
code of conduct.
They do
Okay?
have a code of conduct. You are correct.
They're
I
coming
do
after
respect
Nikki for going after Ace's wife. This is not okay. They put their foot down.
that.
They have morals up until a certain extent.
I do love that that is where they draw the line, though. It's like,
Right?
man, I don't care how many people you kill. I don't care how many houses you rob. I don't care how much money
Yeah.
you steal from us. You just don't go after his wife. Like
Yeah.
this that that's the line. All right. That's cool. At least you
Right?
drew a line.
Like, okay.
At least there's something.
It's actually like probably all just to keep peace within their organization. Like they actually don't care about the morality behind
Oh
it.
yeah.
It's just we don't
Absolutely.
need dudes fighting each other over their wives and their women.
Exactly.
So everybody just keep to your own.
Yes. It's very strategic, you know.
Yes.
You
We
got to
have
keep
plenty of other
things
people that we need to go whack. We don't need you guys whacking each other, okay? Come
exactly.
on.
Yeah, yeah, we save the fighting for out there, not inside the house, you know?
Right. Right. Yes. Okay, one thing that I am excited to get to bring up today is this movie is littered with pinky rings, yo.
It sure is. There's so many
I
of them.
definitely got a dopamine hit every time I see one on screen, which is like every 5 minutes.
There's a lot of them.
I was keeping a tally of them, then at a certain
Ooh,
point I was like, you know what? There's too many. They are just constantly wearing
there
them.
are too many.
So I can't be counting anymore, but
Yeah,
there's too many to count.
there are a lot of them. How high did your tally go?
I stopped after 7,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
which was about like 1 hour into the
Minute
movie.
2.
Yeah, there's so many. There's a particularly great looking one that De Niro wears in the third act of the movie. It's fascinating to see his clothing become more and more flamboyant as he rises to power. I thought that was just a great like costume design choice, both in color and also in material, just more and more flashy, but also in pinky ring. There is like a geometric looking one that he wears in the last I think 45 minutes of the film. That I was like, that's a great choice. Goes with the like modern look that you're going for. Very
Mhm.
good.
Yeah, it was fascinating that his changes throughout the film. I was like,
Yeah.
"Huh, that's different." I feel like
Mhm.
usually it's just like a standard, "This is always what I wear."
Yep.
But no,
Yep.
he had to switch it up. It was nice.
Mhm. Yeah, there's a ton on him. There's a ton on Nikki, of course.
Yes.
There's one on Remo as well,
There are
and the scene
2
where he's
on
talking.
Remo.
Oh,
Remo has 2 pinky rings, 1 on
at
each
the
hand.
same time?
Yeah.
Different scenes.
No, 1 on each hand.
Wow. That is a great data point. We haven't had many where there's 2, right?
Yeah, I don't recall. I think that there's another character that had 2. I can't remember off the top of my head
Okay.
who they were though. But
This
yeah,
is a
when
good
he was
data
playing
point.
poker, I think when he's first introduced, he has 2 pinky rings on.
Like the mob boss is like a great data point to
Yeah.
have 2 for.
Yeah, yeah,
Nothing
yeah.
ambiguous about that one, although maybe if you ask me on a different day, I might say differently. When they're getting busted, maybe not. They're good guys in my book.
I do love that you have such affection for mobsters in mobster movies.
I do. I'm concerned for myself, but that's a whole nother train we could go on.
Oh, it's so good.
Oh man.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
counted and so my count
So
might
yeah,
be
did you count? You have
I
a
did.
count of running tally?
Uh
Oh wow.
yeah. I tried to make notes as best as I could, but there were so many and they're just dudes with pinky rings and so I didn't know who they were. I didn't know the character's name. So this might be inflated. I'm not sure. I tried to match up people to names, but it might be wrong. But I counted 21 people with pinky rings. Is what I got to.
21 humans throughout
21
the film.
humans, not
Wow. Not
21
even
pinky rings.
appearances.
Yeah.
Wow.
Could be wrong, but that is
That
my best
is
guess.
a record,
Yeah, by a
I
long shot.
think. Yes.
Yeah. Basically everyone in this movie is wearing a pinky ring except for Sharon Stone. I don't think she
Like
ever wore
extra
one.
number 27 in the
No,
background.
you will laugh at my notes because my notes, like there one line in my notes is dude eating spaghetti, parentheses, Teamster's room, pinky ring. And then like the early in the film, the croupier that Sam corrects is also wearing a pinky ring. Uh,
Oh my
the
goodness.
dude Remo is playing poker with has a pinky ring on. Like
This needs to be a drinking game. Watch Casino and drink every time. Oh man. No, every appearance would be too much.
it's too much. That's too 21 shots. It's too many.
Yes, far too many.
And they all come so rapidly in the
Maybe
beginning of
it
the
should be
film.
like hydration,
It's wild.
right? Like we
Yes.
don't have to be drinking alcohol, but like
Yeah, drink your
take a sip
water.
of from your water bottle for
Yeah.
hydration purposes and health.
Honestly, that's not bad. We should do that. This is a good reminder to everybody listening, drink your water.
Yes. Drink your water. Hydration nation. All right. Any other thoughts about Casino? Did we hit them all?
I think so. Oh, one scene that I did love is when Nikki and his wife are passing through airport security and they're searching his luggage and then they get home and all of the diamonds were in her bun.
Yes.
I
It's
just
so good.
I really appreciated that. I was like, "You know what? That is a great use of long hair." Cuz I mean, honestly, my hair is super long right now. I could hide all kinds of crap in there. You'd never know.
So many things.
So, I think that was brilliant and so relatable.
Well, I love that Nikki also knows exactly how many there needs to be
Yes.
getting shooken out of her hair because he's like, nope, keep going. There's more.
It's so true. Uh I mean,
Oh,
honestly, he even though he's this like brash enforcer, is easily set off, like yada yada, he has some strategy to him though. And I
mm-hmm.
really appreciate that sometimes he is a detail man. And
Yes.
that's nice to see.
When for the important things, yes. It's also just incredibly endearing when he admits to, I think it's Frankie. He's like, Frankie, I messed up this time. Like, bro, you
Yeah.
messed up like
So many times.
75 years ago in
Yes.
your life.
Yeah. Yeah, like, okay, you gotta be a little bit more specific because for this
Yeah.
entire movie, you've been
You've
messing
just
up.
been a menace, an absolute menace. But I'm glad
But
the
fun to
moment of
watch.
revelation has come to you now.
Yes. Yeah, it took a long time, but you got there. Proud of you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this was our review and discussion of Casino. You can find it available on Paramount Plus with the Showtime edition. Solid, solid Scorsese. So good, so good. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Movies and Us. Our name sums it up. We're all about movies and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories. Everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you hung out with us today. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you tune into your favorite shows. Drop us a review letting us know your thoughts about Casino. You can connect with us on Instagram and Twitter at moviesandUsPod or email us at moviesanduspod@gmail.com. We will be back next week to continue Scorsese's September with the film The Departed. We hope you have an amazing week, and we'll see you next week.